Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Zero F's Era. We're thrilled to have you here for what I believe is going to be one of our most fascinating conversations yet. I'm not sure how you all played pretend as children, but I will venture to guess that most little girls didn't grow up imagining that one day they'll become First Lady of a country they don't even live in. In fact, today's guest had a very different vision for her life. She was building a career, raising four children, and growing a business when her husband, a quiet history professor, decided to run for president of Iceland, and 7 weeks later, he won. Suddenly, she found herself thrust onto a global stage, navigating royal visits, diplomatic events, and public scrutiny, all while trying to figure out what it meant to be known primarily as someone else's wife. I'm joined today by best-selling author, speaker, entrepreneur, and former First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid. We're going to be talking about identity, ambition, gender equality, and what we can learn from Iceland's extraordinary women. We'll also discuss her new memoir, The First Lady Next Door, and her own extraordinary journey. So, Eliza, and I hope it's okay if I call you by your first name. I've never met a former First Lady
I
before.
hope you do. I hope you do, definitely. And especially in Iceland, where we're on a first name basis with everybody else.
I love that. Okay. Well, Eliza, I'm so honored to speak with you today. So, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So, as you may know, we start every Zero F's Era conversation with the truth that we don't say aloud. So, I'll ask you, what is your truth?
I have to confess, this was a tough question for me to think about the truth we don't say out loud. And the best thing that I think I could come up with is that planning has made me more spontaneous, which maybe is a bit counterintuitive of a statement. And I guess I said that for a couple of reasons. One is because I'm a planner. I love to plan, even though I always think on the surface that maybe doesn't sound all that exciting about things. And the reason I say that it has helped make me more spontaneous is that I think that planning lets our minds, or lets at least lets me use my mind, puts me more at ease to be open to life's more unexpected amorphous opportunities. So that if I spend a lot of time thinking about the little details of all sorts of different things, then when the real changes come in life, those things that come from left field that none of us is expecting, i.e., that none of us can plan for, it means somehow that I think we're more mentally ready to take on those other challenges and more confident in our abilities to do so. So that's why I chose that truth.
I think that's a really interesting concept because you're right. It does sound counterintuitive. And you would think planning would make you less spontaneous, but I completely relate to that because when you've built parameters and you understand what you can plan for, then you have the ability to give that space, that white space to the things you can't, which is really the majority of life, I feel.
I think so too, and often of course, I talk about it. I'm sure we'll talk more later about this unexpected moment when I became the First Lady of Iceland. And the interesting thing about that example, I think, is that there's certainly in my case an unexpected opportunity, and it's an unexpected positive change. And I think we talk a lot about negative changes in our lives and shocks in our lives and how we tackle them. But sometimes when we're faced with positive change, because even though it's change, it's uncomfortable, it's easier for us to kind of just coast along, not really make the most of the opportunity because it's so unfamiliar to us anyway. And again, for me, it took me a little while to realize that just my habit of wanting to plan or do things, of course, I never planned to be the First Lady of Iceland, or I never planned about what happens if this occurs. But somehow I realized that just through living my life and my upbringing, I had acquired a lot of the tools that I could use to be successful in that role.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about that because you have lived this truly global life. You were born in Canada, studied in London. Again, you served as the First Lady of Iceland. And so, what has that been like, and how has that shaped your perspective?
I consider myself very fortunate to have lived abroad so much. And I think anybody who's lived abroad for any time, whether that is studying or moving or living, I think it just gives us a different perspective to how other people live, right, in different areas. And that I think makes us more understanding people. But as I said, I grew up on I'd call it a hobby farm in Canada. So it wasn't my parents' primary income, but it was the countryside. And we had a party line telephone and there was no public transport or, God forbid, no cable television. I studied first at the University of Toronto, which was like the big city for me to go there. It was only the second time I'd been to the city was when I moved there at 18 to go and study. I just think it gives us that new perspective. And I feel really incredibly fortunate that my life kind of panned out that way, that I lived in these different places and that I still continue to travel a lot. Travel is one of the things that I love doing the most.
Well, we have a number of things in common here as I'm learning. One, our love of travel, but I grew up on a farm in South Texas with a party line, no public transport, all of
So
those things.
right?
Exactly. So I was living a parallel life, only much further south and warmer
Yeah.
weather.
But, there's something too about growing up in the countryside. I think there's this great example too, neighbors helping neighbors, people kind of looking out for each other if you ever need anything. I want to say wholesome, which sounds a bit silly and hokey. I don't mean it that way, but it's a really like trustworthy, reliable people.
It is. I
Salt of the
do think.
earth.
Exactly. And I do think it positions you to be there for others, to just
Hmm.
inherently care about the people who are around you. But it's funny, when I
Hmm.
moved to New York, I would make all my neighbors say hello, even if they really didn't seem like they were in the mood to, because I
Exactly.
used to talk to neighbors.
Yeah, that's right, for sure.
So I wanted to kind of go in a different direction now and talk
Okay.
about gender equality, because I know that this is a topic that you are well versed in and you've written about it. And it's a subject that speaks to me both as a woman, so on a personal level, but also a mom to a 13-year-old
Mm-hmm.
daughter who is going to be
Hmm.
navigating these waters as well. So, do you view gender equality as a women's issue or as a societal issue?
Yeah, I think it's a human rights issue, I guess I would say. To me, gender equality is not a zero sum game. It's not about taking something from one group to give it to another group. It's about leveling the playing field for people of all genders to give all of us opportunities, which means that it's an issue that is important to everybody because the more gender equal our societies are, and there is data to back this up, the more peaceful, happier, longer living for men and for women societies we have, more prosperous as well. So it's really, it's something that's good for everybody. And I think that that's one of the important reasons to talk about it, because I think that many people do see it as a women's issue. And if they somehow don't identify with that, they don't see it as important for them as something that is also beneficial to them, or potentially they see it as a threatening issue because they think that the pie is limited, and so if one group of people get more of something, the others will not. But in fact, I think that is something that is great for everyone. And I'm really fortunate to have made Iceland my home, which is the country that is closest in the world to closing the gender gap. It's the only country in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, that's closed more than 90% of its gender gap, which obviously does not mean we have closed it, right? It mean we still are not gender equal either in Iceland. But I think broadly speaking, as a society, we've kind of passed the tipping point of debating whether or not working towards greater equality is important, but how we're going to get there. And there's plenty of room there for wonderful, healthy dialogue and discussion. But I think that there's less of a dialogue about why it's important.
Well, I think the rest of the world could learn a lot from Iceland on that point. I think many countries are still struggling with the why it's important, not the how
Hmm.
we get there.
Hmm.
Do
Hmm.
you find that to be the case as well?
Yes, in places that I speak to again. And I think that's why, for me, it's really important to position it as a human rights issue and as an equal issue that's benefit for all people. I'll give an example. In Iceland, we have a government paid parental leave benefits, which are for both parents. So in heterosexual relationships, both a mother and a father get amounts of leave that they can take, and one parent can't take it all, which means that most fathers take their, government paid parental leave. And again, statistics show that when fathers take parental leave, there's lower divorce rates, there's lower depression rates amongst those kids when they get older. The kids are happier. And I have yet to meet a dad that said, I didn't like that, one-on-one time with my child when they were really young. So, there are advantages for everybody in working towards leveling that playing field.
I love that Iceland takes that longer term view of the holistic health of that child, not in that immediate moment where they need care from their parents, but later on in life, the additional benefit of having that care. and that level of support. That's pretty
I
incredible.
I mean, I love that too, actually. I as you mentioned, I have 4 children and an adult stepdaughter, and of my 4 children, it's 3 boys and then a girl. And the boys are all well, they're kind of young men now, I suppose, but they're all older teenagers. And they also talk about, I never want kids to grow up thinking that they have to get married, that they have to have children. But if they are, of course, that's great. But they also grow up thinking, oh, when I have kids, I'm gonna be this way with her. Am I going to do this way this way? And I think they really already consider themselves as kind of active and engaged parents should they choose to be parents later on in life, which I think is good.
I think so too. I think it's a really wonderful aspect of this generation that our kids are. I have a 16-year-old son, so
Mm,
I will categorize him as that as well.
hmm.
And they do see equality there in ways that
Yeah.
maybe our generation and the ones before us didn't view it in the same light. And
Yeah.
so that gives me hope for.
We have to look at that hopeful side. And my boys also really give me hope. We do have to be aware that, there is a global backlash against gender equality. There's something called the Reykjavik Global Index, which studies perceptions of women as leaders in various public roles, whether that's politics or in the boardroom or elsewhere. And the last studies, for the first times, the perception of women as trustworthy leaders has actually gone down. And so it's lower for amongst younger generation of men now than it was for their grandparents. So they're actually having a lower opinion of that, which shows that I think we need to do a better job of telling people why this is also important for them, why it's not like the world is now ignoring them or moving ahead or somehow holding them back. But in fact, it's something that is the more opportunities there are for everyone, the more everyone has the opportunity to fulfill their potential.
You think that part of the reason why is that there aren't as many female leadership role models, and so it's a narrower category for them
Yeah.
to draw upon that experience?
I think that's a really good point, and that's true. And I think role models are really important in all facets, right? We also need to see male role models in traditionally female areas. And I think one of the things that we've been pretty good at over the years has been maybe teaching our daughters that they can do anything and that they're strong and independent and giving them these examples. But I don't know how much that we've changed necessarily the definition of what a quote unquote real man is. And so that definition has remained, I think, a little bit narrower still, less inclusive towards all types of men and all types of masculinity as well, which I think creates a pressure of belonging amongst young men. And, belonging is one of the greatest needs that I think we all have. And so we as societies, I think, need to work to encourage everyone to feel an increased sense of belonging and able to contribute in their own unique way to society.
I completely agree with you. I think there are some probably differences that you experienced moving to Iceland from Canada. Did you notice immediately how women were viewed, supported, and represented there versus other places you had lived?
Yes and no. I was quite young. I was 22 when I left Canada, and then I studied in the UK and worked in the UK for a number of years. So I kind of progressed through Europe, and then up to Iceland. And so when I was in my 20s still and I moved to Iceland, of course, you're a little bit more idealistic. When you move to a new country, sometimes you have these rose tinted glasses and you think everything is amazing and everything is better in this country. And maybe I did to an extent. I do tell a story in my first book, Secrets of the Spraker, which is all about women in Iceland. One moment that sticks with me is I got a job for a small software startup, which was mostly men, but the chair of the board of the company was a woman. And one day I was walking by their meeting room when they were meeting, and the woman was chairing the meeting and she was breastfeeding her baby, and nobody cared. And she was just chairing the meeting as she was holding a baby and nursing her, and nobody was kind of looking away. It was just a completely natural thing to do. And it really stuck in my mind, even though I didn't have children then and I wasn't planning on having children soon, just to think that something so natural was seen as so natural. There's a wonderful, funny story to sort of coda to that story that is very Icelandic because we don't have a big population in Iceland. And that is that woman is now the president and won the election after my husband stopped being the president. So that shows you how small Iceland is in many senses.
Love that, though. First of all, that is in stark contrast to every other business experience I've had around the world. I traveled with my children when they were infants and would run back up to my hotel room, nurse, and then put my other face back on and run back down
Mhm.
and be, a different person essentially. So the
Mhm.
fact that they allow space for those two things to coexist
Mhm.
is pretty phenomenal and something that I don't
Mhm.
think happens a lot in other places.
Mhm.
One of the themes of Zero F's era is giving yourself permission to take up space. Why do you think so many women still struggle with claiming their authority even when they've earned it?
It's the question for the era, I think, isn't it? Because, and I think a lot of it is that we're socialized to not to take up space, whether that is socialized to be physically smaller than we are, to be constantly told that we're too big or that we should minimize ourselves, or by minimizing products, to criticism that we see of women's voices, right? That women's voices are perceived as less trustworthy somehow, as higher pitched, as more shrill. There's a lot of judgment on the voices, and then when we do speak up, and we do speak up in settings, very often we're actually really not heard, and we're minimizing ourselves on the subway, and when you walk down the sidewalk, I try to do this consciously, is like not to move out of the way when I'm walking down the sidewalk and someone is coming towards me, which I think we're all just as women socialized to do, right? To not create a scene, to not be difficult, to be amenable to things. There's a small story in relation to this that I tell in the First Lady Next Door, my memoir being First Lady, which is when my husband was first president. And of course, you host receptions at the presidential residence. And I noticed at the beginning that every time we would host a reception, whether it was 10 people or 200 people, there's a receiving line, of course, and people come in and shake the president's hand, shake my hand, and then go in and get a glass of bubbly. Except that on every occasion, there was just a few, but not a lot, but always a couple who would shake the president's hand and then walk right by me into the other room. And of course, they're not deliberately trying to snub me in any sense. They just didn't notice this 5'6" human being standing next to the president, because they're really excited to see the president. They can't believe they're at the presidential residence. And after those meetings, even though it was just a couple of people, it used to really frustrate me, of course. And I'd be really kind of mad at them, but I'd be more mad at myself for not being more assertive, for not doing anything, and then thinking, well, this is the tiniest of gripes. Who can I complain to that someone didn't shake my hand? It's ridiculous. But it was kind of a mental shift in my mind that I wasn't taking up the space, even though I was standing there, that for some reason my presence wasn't assertive enough. And of course, I want to say there's a quick fix, although it took me, years to figure this out. And that is, of course, if someone shakes his hand and starts to walk by me, I would just put my hand out and say, hello, welcome. And then they see you and they shake your hand. And of course, there's no problem with it. But I think to me, it was really just almost a kind of very concrete, tangible example of a very small area in which, I consider myself a confident person. But for some reason, my aura, my presence just wasn't taking up that space. I think it's just because of so much of how we've been socialized, and then we need to really consciously work against that, and consciously make decisions not to do that, and to stick up for each other, right? To call out the ideas in the room, to reiterate and give people credit when we see other people in the meetings and other people in the rooms who are not being noticed either.
I think that's such a great point, and I don't think you're being petty at all. I would absolutely take offense to that as well. This is a gripe on a much smaller scale, but my husband and I recently bought a new car. Of the three places we looked, two places the salesman didn't shake my hand or make eye contact with me. We didn't
Yeah.
buy from either of them,
No.
and it really still surprises me how it's acceptable in
Hmm.
society to overlook the
Hmm.
woman and deal directly man to man. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I love that you're saying, no, that's not acceptable. Make your presence known
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
command that respect.
And conversely, in other situations, I spoke with a woman at a conference in Central Europe last year who was saying that their daughter was born during the pandemic, when they were limiting the numbers and had to be in the NICU for a little while, and they wouldn't allow fathers in the NICU. They would only allow the mothers, as if somehow the fathers aren't good enough parents if they have to limit the numbers. And I think, what kind of a message does that send to a new father, that they are, somehow qualified enough to look after their child who's in the intensive care unit?
Or you are not a parent of equal standing.
Yeah,
That
exactly, exactly.
that the mother is the one that warrants it. Oh,
Hmm.
interesting. Well, during your time as First Lady, and you're occupying this very visible position within the country, but it wasn't a position with formal power. What did you learn from that about
Hmm.
influence versus authority?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, there's no rule book, of course, on how to serve as a spouse to head of state. And I said at the beginning that I was a planner and I like to plan. And I also love rule books, and I'm the person who, if I buy a toaster, I read the instruction manual for the toaster, even though I'm pretty sure I should be able to figure out how I use it, right? But I like to follow the rules. And so when this unexpectedly happened after a 7-week campaign, I remember thinking, well, what am I allowed to do? What's the rule book for being a first lady? Because I want to do it really well. What an honor and an opportunity. And I'm so excited to do this, but I don't want to break any rules. And so it was a little bit uncomfortable not knowing what the rules were. And then again, not overnight, but gradually, I started to try to shift my mindset and to think, well, if there is no rule book, I can't break any rules either. And so whatever I decide to do is probably okay, if I trust my own instinct and my integrity and my experience. And so that's really what I tried to do in terms of using my voice to champion causes that I thought were important and to speak up to various issue areas. So I think it's maybe one of the most public or extreme examples of, as I said, trying to take up that space and use my voice, even though I didn't have an engraved invitation to do so necessarily, but I did all of a sudden have this platform.
I love that you made that platform your own and took advantage of that. And you proved that you can make an impact even if you're not the person directly in charge. Do you have
Mhm.
any advice for women who want to create change from whatever position they're in, wherever they sit?
Mhm. I think it's just the reminder that we're all role models and that we all have an influence. And very few people are heads of state, very few people are elected officials. And of course, in some situations, people have an outsized influence or a different platform, but we all have to do something. And if there's one thing that I remember serving as first lady when I was writing the book, someone said, well, what did you do as first lady? And again, for a minute, I had that imposter syndrome thinking, what did I do? I didn't have a foundation and I didn't raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And because the role isn't really that kind of a role. And then I thought what I did do was my best. And maybe that's enough. We're under a lot of pressure these days that if we can't solve all the problems, we shouldn't solve any of them. And I feel like we're in a very binary all or nothing approach sometimes. And I didn't change the world as First Lady of Iceland, but I did do my part to nudge things in the right direction. And I think that that is an important message to say that you don't have to bear the weight of the world on your shoulders. You don't have to solve everything. You don't have to solve it perfectly. But I do think that you do have to do your part to nudge things in the right direction. Just a little bit every day on whatever you feel is important. And I really believe in that ripple effect. Another aspect of what I'm so grateful for of having the opportunity to serve as First Lady was, of course, there's lots of little stories I tell in the book about going to the White House and meeting President Biden and going to King Charles's coronation and all of this. But what I remember are these little moments of meeting the choir director who served for 40 years and the woman who started the puppetry festival in the village of 300 people. And these are the little moments to show that, most people, and, Misty can maybe relate to this growing up on the farm in the South. Most people are good people, right? They're going to lend you eggs when you need eggs. They're going to give you shelter when you need it. They're going to ask after your kids. They just want to create a good life for themselves. And I feel really grateful that I had the opportunity to witness that. All of those little actions. None of those people are going to be world famous who did those things, but that's not the point, right? The point is just to do your part. And I think that is a kind of unsexy but powerful message.
It is because I think, and I'll just speak for myself, but I think I'm not alone here. People sometimes don't act because they feel like they don't have it all figured out and they don't have
Right.
all those answers. And so starting feels daunting when you don't
Yeah.
know what comes next after that first step.
For sure. For sure. And then I think when we realize that's why it's also important to speak up about things, that's kind of everybody, right? If there's something that you're unsure about or you don't know about or you think is unclear, I can guarantee you that somebody else has had that thought before or that feeling before. And it's not necessarily on you. And I think being able to speak up about our insecurities, our mistakes, the lessons learned, what we're scared of, in addition to celebrating all the good stuff, um, that just makes us human and relatable, and again hopefully is encouraging to other people to stand up and do their part. And it's just I just put one foot in front of the other and see what happens.
I think vulnerability is a superpower. So if you can display that human side of yourself and stay curious to want to learn more,
Mm.
that's the magic there.
Curiosity
Um,
is a great word. Curiosity, resilience, kindness are all important things, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of being a little bit vulnerable, did I read that you had to Google how to curtsy
I
when
did.
you
Well, that lack
um,
of instruction manuals, also lack of like not a lot of formal protocol training. And turns out when you're, the president and first lady, you go on state visits. And our first state visit was to Denmark to meet the then Queen of Denmark. And I figured, well, you have to curtsy when you meet a queen. But if you actually think about it, how do you curtsy? How do you do it? And it turns out if you Google it, it made it more complicated because there's many different kinds of curtsies. And of course, it was all okay. I don't think I brought too much shame to Iceland in my little mini curtsy, but I did Google how to curtsy. Yes,
I don't recall reading about that as an international incident, so I'm assuming you
Whew,
nailed the curtsy, but it is tough.
excellent.
I find very few opportunities in my life to apply a good
Mhm.
curtsy, so I would have to
Well,
as well.
and I'll just say you never know. One of the strangest stories in the book is a similar incident in Denmark where my sash in a white tie gala was over the wrong shoulder, but it had been sewn to my gala dress and had to be fixed in an instant. But I'll let people, that'll be a teaser for people to read the book so they'll find out what happened next. It involves other members of European royal families. I will give you that hint.
Way to stand out though with the sash going the opposite direction.
Hmm, hmm.
I'm curious, what else did you have to just figure out when you became first lady? Because you had 7 weeks,
Yeah.
and suddenly you were thrust into
Yeah.
that spotlight.
And I mean, our kids were 2, 4, 6, and 8 years old. So and I run
Oh,
a writer's retreat every year. So I was kind of busy. This sounds maybe superficial, but to me, it was probably one of the biggest stresses was clothing because, again, children 2, 4, 6, and 8, clothing was not top of mind for me. I will tell you when I was working full time and doing all that, and all of a sudden, I needed the wardrobe of a first lady. And I found that intimidating and challenging. And then you just kind of, you learn as you go, I guess. And I'm also, an immigrant in Iceland. I speak Icelandic, but I speak it with an accent. I make mistakes. So I wanted to make sure that when I was doing speeches and television interviews that I wasn't accidentally saying embarrassing words for other words that I meant, which has happened before. And but also it was important for me to speak that way so that people in Iceland saw that even though I speak with an accent that I still have something important to say. So those are a couple of the learning curves that I had. But I only googled how to curtsy just that one time.
I'm curious how long it took you to learn Icelandic because those words are not short.
They're not
It
short, no. I trip
lots of
over them a
vowels.
lot. Well, I guess, it's always a learning process. Having a husband who runs for president, then you learn words like referendum and polling data very quickly, which are words
Yeah,
I did
you
not
moved
know
on from
before.
101 very fast.
Constitutional crisis. Yeah.
As we sort of circle back to some of our original topics, I think as women, we're often encouraged to be agreeable and accommodating and grateful for whatever comes our way. So, how do we balance those qualities? Because those are not bad qualities.
No,
How do we balance those with ambition and leadership? And how do those things coexist?
I think we need to celebrate the positive dimensions of those. As you said, like to be called if a man is called ambitious, that's really considered positive. And I think if a woman is called ambitious, that's considered less positive. And to do that, we just need to be more visible in celebrating women in lots of different roles, right? And think about the terms that we use to describe women. I've always called myself a feminist. I know that that is to me that's not a political term. I know that it can be a very polarizing term in some senses. And so for that reason, because my kind of feminism is a very inclusive, nice, happy feminism that's not against any other group. I try to use it a lot so that I make that word, I hope, an inclusive and happy word. And I think we just need to do that with these qualities that we think are important for women, as you said, to be ambitious, to be assertive, to have loud voices, to be opinionated. These are all things that we say about men that are good things, and I think they're also things in women too.
I agree. And I think you're right. Socializing them in this positive context to override some of the negative ways they're used is the only way to
Mm-hmm.
move that forward.
Yeah. And conversely, also to tell men to talk about their feelings, like tell them to talk about how they feel about certain things and to use these more quote unquote feminine attributes as well, that they don't necessarily need to fit into some really narrow mold.
Do you think that's how we get to more gender equality by changing some of those perceptions about women and ambition and leadership, and then at the same time, the perceptions that men can be vulnerable, that they can show emotion, and sort of balancing that a
Yeah.
bit more?
I do think so. Also, in the sense that I think that that puts, I think that it puts the onus on us, things that we as individuals can do, because I don't think that it's something that governments can dictate. I don't think it's of course, policies can help and policies can speed things up, but I don't think that's enough for a big societal shift. And I think we also need to be aware. So it's, as you said, making sure that everybody feels like they have something in it, that it's not being dictated to them. And also realizing that equality is a decision. It's a conscious choice, and it's not going to just kind of happen naturally of its own accord simply because of the amount of inequality that exists already. And so I don't buy into the argument where people say, well, if it's meant to be this way, it's just going to come out in the wash and everything is going to even out, because we didn't start off even, right? And so I think that we need to be really aware that it's a conscious choice. And like we face today in the world, a big global backlash everywhere against gender equality, I think that it's all the more reasonable to continue to point out why it's beneficial for everyone and why we all need to keep fighting for it. But I hope fighting in a kind of happy and positive way, um, and a galvanizing way, and maybe less, not so angry one against each other way.
Yeah, not in an adversarial way. Though,
Mm,
if you think about it, we're trying to undo generations of a certain thought process. And
hmm.
so, more than likely, it takes generations to undo that to get us to a more
Yeah.
positive space.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, as we near the end of every Zero F's era conversation, we have something called the permission slip, where you get to give yourself permission to let go of something that holds you down or holds you back and no longer serves you. So I will ask, what is your permission slip?
I think mine is to stop trying to be all things to all people. And I think that, we have a lot of balls. We're always juggling in the air all the time. And we have to say that it's okay to drop some of those sometime. And if I feel we have a lot of privilege if we're able to choose which balls we're going to drop, because not everybody gets to do that. But just not to try to do everything perfectly all the time. We're all human.
Great, very good advice and a good point. Um, I will also ask, are you in your Zero F's era right now?
Yes, I think so, in a good way. And I just turned 50 last month, so I don't know, it's kind of
Welcome
in
to
that
the
moment,
club.
but yeah, I'm enjoying it so far, I recommend it.
Excellent. Well, any advice for someone who is not there just yet, who might be on their Zero F's journey?
I know, like, me in my 20s, I would say that, don't worry so much about what everybody else thinks, worry about what you think, and trust your values and your integrity, and that a lot of your own experience will serve you very well in even the most unexpected situations.
Wonderful advice. Well, Eliza, I have the deepest of gratitude to you today for joining us, for sharing your story. Just a fascinating conversation, and I wish we had more time because there's so many more questions I would love to ask you. Perhaps we'll do a part two another time.
Okay.
Um, but I also want to thank all
Yeah.
of you who have listened in. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Zero F's Era, or you can email us at zerofsera@gmail.com. And remember to be all out of F's for the things that just don't matter so that you can make space for the things that do. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.